Planning Commission meeting 2022. This meeting is being conducted consistent with Assembly Bill 361 or Government Code Section 54953E. The Planning Commission meeting includes teleconference participation by all members. We're conducting the meeting using the Zoom platform, streaming live on the city website and broadcasting on Comcast Channel 15, as well as via the city YouTube channel. Public members have the opportunity to submit emails to city staff. A report of all written comments was distributed to Planning Commission members via email and posted to the city's website under documents received after published agenda. I sent in some questions, they caught back. So with that, we will throw it over to Ms. Denise Chan. Can you call roll, please?
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Ali Sullivan.
Hi, good evening, present.
Commissioner Bonilla.
Present.
Thank you. Commissioner Goldstein. I think Commissioner Goldstein might be having connection issues, so we'll come back to him. Commissioner Lowe.
Present.
Commissioner Roche.
Here.
Commissioner Stevens.
Here.
Chair Okenda.
Present.
Thank you. We'll keep an eye out for Commissioner Goldstein.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Excellent. And it's good to see you, Commissioner Ali Sullivan. So what's next here? I think we can move right into public comments. For items not on the agenda, I'll read the little blurb. The public comment section provides an opportunity to address the Planning Commission on items not listed on the agenda. The Planning Commission welcomes comments and requests that speakers present their remarks in a respectful manner. Speakers wishing to address the Planning Commission should limit their comments to 3 minutes. Do we have people who are available to speak? I see no attendees.
Yes, we have no attendees at this time, Chair.
Okay, well, I will give it a second. And there's no reason for us to wait and hold up the rest of the meeting. So I'm going to go ahead and, as quick as we open public comment, close it now and move on to our first agenda item, which I will, I did not open the agenda actually, but I want to pass it on to staff, but I know I'm supposed to read the item, but I don't have the agenda right in front of me. Let me see if I can get it.
Would you like one of us to read it, Chair?
If you wouldn't mind, that'd be great. Thank you. That would save us time.
All right, this is a work session item. Item number 1, status report on implementation of the existing affordable housing ordinance and steps and next steps for potential modifications to the ordinance. My screen went blank. What happened? Okay, so there you go. Go ahead, staff.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. I'm Christina Morales. I am the Housing Division Manager. So thank you for having me here tonight. As mentioned, the item before you is a status report on the implementation of the Affordable Housing Ordinance. And before we discuss the report, I just wanted to give a high-level overview of the options under the Affordable Housing Ordinance. There's 2 primary options. One is to create on-site affordable housing or affordable housing units, and the other is to pay an affordable housing in lieu fee. So with the 2 options they serve different needs. And when we prioritize one, we deprioritize the other. So in other words, if a project has on-site affordable housing, the city doesn't collect fees, and that money is then used to subsidize affordable housing. Both options create affordable units, but the different options serve different populations and at different magnitudes. So as we review these findings, let's keep in mind that as it's difficult to implement a one-size-fits-all policy, and we need to think strategically about think strategically and use a variety of affordable housing strategies, including the Affordable Housing Ordinance, the Density Bonus Ordinance, the sale of public land, in order to provide a variety of affordable housing options that meet the needs of the community. I also want to provide a bit of a background. So as a quick reminder, the Affordable Housing Ordinance was amended in late 2017, And in early 2020, the City Council directed staff to evaluate the affordable housing ordinance out of a desire to increase the supply of affordable housing. It's also important to note that there is a state adopted legislation that reaffirmed the local government's authority to create affordable housing in rental properties, where before there was some question as to whether cities could require that. But this legislation also added some oversight to ensure that local ordinance didn't constrain the development of housing. So we have to keep in mind not only that we have legislation that we can adopt, but there are some limits to our authority and some oversight. So the purpose of this presentation is to discuss, we want to start out by discussing the housing feasibility considerations as they're related to affordable housing. We also are going to provide a brief summary of what the last modifications were as a reminder of what were the last adopted changes. And then we want to discuss the outcomes of implementation of the Affordable Housing Ordinance in the context of its ability to address the needs of Hayward community. And then after that, we want to give you the opportunity to discuss what the goals are in revising the affordable housing and what target populations that are being served. So keeping in mind as we discuss the different findings, who is the intended audience of revising the affordable housing ordinance, and not necessarily the mechanics of how the ordinance works, but what are the outcomes that we want to see. And then we'll take an opportunity to discuss what the next steps are in terms of evaluating the affordable housing ordinance or revising it. So as noted earlier, there's concern that the affordable housing requirements can constrain development. Therefore, we want to take a moment to discuss project feasibility. The affordable housing ordinance affects feasibility in one of two ways. If the developer pays the fees, it increases costs. But if the developer provides a below market rate on-site unit, it decreases revenue. So if the anticipated costs associated with developing all of the units, those costs such as land acquisition, planning approvals, fees, site improvement, construction costs, and their profit margin, if those exceed the projected revenue from renting or selling the unit, the developer will not be able to finance the development and the housing will not get constructed. Unfortunately, the revenue generated from below market rate housing units does not cover the costs of developing that unit. This is why the state requires the feasibility studies to ensure that the city won't unduly constrain development with its affordable housing requirements. So as a reminder, when the city amended the affordable housing ordinance in late 2017, it relied on a feasibility study to set the new fee and also determine what the appropriate affordable housing requirement was based on what the development projects could support. And it looked at the affordable housing, it looked at the projects differently depending on the type of project. So one of the biggest changes is it extended the applicability from projects that were 20 units or more to projects that were 2 or more. It also increased the affordable housing in lieu fee from between $3 and $5 per habitable square foot to between $15 and $18 per habitable square foot. It increased the on-site affordable housing requirement for single family homes for ownership units from 7.5% to 10%. While it maintained the lower rate of 7.5% for high density condominiums. It also proposed reducing the on-site requirement from rental housing from 7.5% to 6% because the council chose to target low and very low income households. So providing that deeper affordability level. It also allowed a reduced fee for projects that were less than 9 units in order to prevent disincentivizing some of the smaller infill development projects. It also allowed developers to choose their method of compliance. And so there are 4 primary methods of compliance. One is to provide on-site affordable housing units at the percentages mentioned before. They could also provide those units off-site, which we have not seen a developer take advantage of that option yet. or pay the affordable housing lieu fee. And lastly, the option is to propose an alternative plan. This has primarily been used on projects that have been negotiating a development agreement with the city, or projects that have had mixed tenure. So we've seen this in a few projects where they have looked at providing alternative plans. And in some cases, some of the projects have provided deeper affordability. So to start with our findings, the first finding is really based on the city's displacement study that we conducted in 2020. So a lot of the data is based on the 2019 American Community Survey. But what we saw through that study is that there's a housing supply gap, and comparing the incomes of the residents, the community members in Hayward to what the housing supply is, we see that there is a lack of housing units for people who need housing priced below $1,250 per month. So there's a gap of about 4,600 units that are needed by existing community members. It was also noted in the report that this particularly impacts low-income households, particularly renters and Black and Hispanic households, because they're experiencing this intense economic pressure because there are people from other communities with higher incomes moving to Hayward. So this puts pressure on the existing housing stock, gives property owners the ability to raise rents, and creates a situation where it is harder for Hayward residents to stay housed. We also noted in our study that the on-site inclusionary housing is not meeting the needs of Hayward residents in this category. So people who need these extremely low income units and very low income units. And that's because there's not enough market rate rental housing being built. So with little rental housing being built and having a low percentage, we're not getting any rental units that are targeting this demographic of people. And we also note that the market rate rental units can't provide units to extremely low income households that usually, in addition to housing, can utilize supportive services so that they can stay housed. So in terms of rental housing and meeting this need that was identified in our displacement study, the affordable housing ordinance for the on-site requirement only is challenged to meet that need. Now, when we look at the affordable housing ordinance in the context of the affordable housing in lieu fee, creating subsidies for development project is meeting the need of this very low and extremely low income population. So we've noticed that there are 241 units of housing for extremely low income and very low income households that are currently under development. And the affordable housing in lieu fees help to create housings for this population. And it's important to note that the way that it does this is that it leverages other funds. So it is required, most of the state funding sources that are available for affordable housing require a local investment. So that local investment from the city then leverages state and federal tax credits. It leverages other state funding programs, such as the Local Housing Trust Fund, which this city was awarded last year, funds in order to support the development of some of our projects. And so having those in lieu fees available to help this target population is a critical resource to meeting this needs of extremely low and very low income households. We also have concern that rental housing feasibility is constrained under the affordable housing ordinance. Because we're not seeing rental housing being developed in larger projects, we see some small projects being developed in the city, but not many large projects that are being developed. In fact, not many. We aren't seeing any large rental projects being built that were adopted or approved under this current ordinance. So we're concerned that those 2018 amendments may have negatively impacted the market rate housing. That's not to say there aren't other factors that have made it difficult, such as the increase in development costs. But it is something to note that if we're not getting these rental housing projects being proposed and approved, then we're not getting the on-site affordable housing. So it becomes ineffective as a mechanism to create affordable housing for low and very low income households if the market isn't able to produce those rental units. The next finding is more of a positive one, is we are seeing that there is demand for building ownership housing. So we have seen quite a few ownership projects being proposed and entitled. There's 407 units of ownership housing that has been entitled since adoption of the last ordinance. 37 units of moderate income housing will be built, 2 low income units and 1 very low income. It's important to note that these aren't under construction yet, and until they start construction are we really sure that the development is going to go through. However, it looks promising with some of the projects that we see starting to pull permits. And it's also promising to note that it looks like some projects may have the ability to do deeper affordability targeting in terms of trying to meet the renter population in the city of Hayward where their income is. So most city of Hayward renters are considered low income. So trying to get those more affordable units will provide a stepping stone for Hayward renters to then become homeowners. The other finding is that when we look at what the RHNA compliance is, it would be unattainable to make our RHNA goals if we only relied on on-site inclusionary units. Considering what the goals are right now, we would need over 34,000 units in order to comply with our RHNA goal. And considering that since 2018 or over the last 4 years, only 1,658 market rate project units have started construction. So the volume of development won't meet, looking at our on-site requirements alone, won't meet our RHNA goals. Even if we took into consideration, assuming that we increase the on-site requirement to 15%, we would still need to see market rate development exceeding 15,000 units. So in order to use the on-site as that mechanism for compliance alone, we would fall short in meeting those goals. We've also noted in working with some of the smaller developments that are providing housing is that it becomes an administrative burden for 2 reasons. One, it takes the same amount of effort to negotiate the agreements, develop marketing plans, market the units for 1 unit as it does 20. So the number of units don't change, but the amount of effort is still there. We also are finding that these smaller projects are managed by less experienced developers. They're typically not working with an attorney to negotiate their agreements. They're trying to do it all on their own, market the units on their own, so they don't have the resources or the experience of the larger developers to take on the additional work that is required to market these affordable units that affirmatively furthers fair housing, and to make sure that they can implement some of the lease up requirements that we have and the oversight as well. So keeping in mind that with these smaller projects, it takes a lot more effort for staff to provide the technical assistance they need in order to comply. We've also found that looking at the affordable housing ordinance in connection with the density bonus is increasing the number of affordable units in the city of Hayward. So by providing concessions, the developer is able to reduce costs, which means that they can provide more affordable units. So combining the 2 ordinances, in fact, they overlap, it helps the developers to reduce their costs and increase affordable units. For the 100% affordable housing units that have been approved, it's increased the number of units from 286 units to 517. And when we look at the market rate ownership projects, 2 market rate developers have exceeded the minimum requirements under the affordable housing ordinance creating 5 additional affordable units. So we are starting to see some benefit of the density bonus and encouraging more on-site affordable units. And I believe in one case, they also provided a deeper affordability level in the project on the ownership side. So we have 2 primary questions that we want you to consider. The first one is, what are the goals for revising the affordable housing ordinance? And particularly, what is your top priority? Because I know the tendency is we want to help, we want to do it all. We want to make the best ordinance. But I provided a few examples of sample goals that there could be, but I really want to hear from you what the goal is. We don't necessarily have to solve how we're going to do it, but we can take this information and provide it to the consultant that's going to do the feasibility study, and they can help us best match which tools, because we have more than one tool besides the affordable housing ordinance to try to meet these goals. And then the second question is really, what are the target populations you want to serve? And this, again, I know that the instinct is to try to help everyone, but if you could also identify who you think the top priority is, so that when we're working with the consultant, we can include this information for them to help really shape. Not only do we want to study what the maximum amount of affordable housing can be provided, but we want to see what are the best tools and resources to maximize it, since there are different tools that will help this become more feasible. And we met with the Homeless and Housing Task Force last week to discuss this and to get some direction. And I want to share with you some of the goals that they provided. The first was to help the most vulnerable renters and home purchasers by maximizing the effectiveness of the affordable housing ordinance. So that would be looking at strategically at the ordinance and deciding, where does it make sense to collect fees? Where does it make sense to prioritize on-site, and doing an analysis of the ordinance in that context. Others had identified making Hayward one of the most affordable cities by creating higher density, mixed income housing as fast as possible, with an emphasis of helping students and seniors. There was a desire to provide down payment assistance to make home ownership more affordable. And lastly, find a model that will create ownership housing that meets the needs of the community that is at risk of displacement and being barred from home ownership. So lots of direction there, and a lot of different groups to be targeted, but it gives us some idea of what the desire is of the Homeless Housing Task Force. And so now I would like to discuss the next steps. So based on direction from the task force and the comments from the commission that we'll receive tonight, we will be issuing a request for proposal so we can identify a consultant to do a feasibility study. And then we will be returning to the Homeless and Housing Task Force in September so that we can receive additional feedback from them on the findings of the feasibility analysis. With that concludes my presentation, and I am here to receive comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Really appreciate it. Good presentation. Where I want to start with is going over to the attendees before we get to the commissioners, and I figure it'd be easier just to lump our questions and comments together. So if I'm going to go ahead and open public comment on this item, and Denise, could you please moderate, and we'll see if anybody raises their hands from the public to speak on this item.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I want to acknowledge Commissioner Daniel Goldstein joined us at about 7:03. All right.
Great.
Okay, so
Hi, Dan.
if you wish to speak and you are using the Zoom application, please click the raise hand function and your name will be called. If you are, nobody's dialing in. Okay. Please mute all other audio before speaking. Your area code, no, I'm sorry. Let me see. When called to speak, please begin by stating your name and limit your remarks to 3 minutes. All right. So I have Tom Ferreira who has raised his hand. Right, Tom, please unmute yourself. Go ahead, Tom.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we
Can you
can.
hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
we can.
Hi, Planning Commission. Thank you for having this meeting tonight. My name's Tom Ferreira. I've been in Hayward about 28 years. I just want to speak on the affordability of Hayward. For the past couple of decades since I've been here, the city has concentrated its efforts on high-density condos, townhomes throughout Hayward. This has caused families to move, two schools to possibly close next year, and possibly close next year, and our unhoused population to rise. We need to focus on our businesses and our residents again and make affordable housing our #1 goal. We need to eliminate the city in lieu fees for housing contractors. Just doing that alone would make an enormous positive change for Hayward. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Please mute yourself. Okay, Chair, the other attendee has not raised her hand. Ms. Aguilar, would you like to speak? Or
There you go.
unmute yourself, Ms. Aguilar?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you very much. The Affordable Housing Ordinance has several purposes from what I heard the Planning Commission and City Council say in various housing meetings. There's transitional housing, rental housing, and owner-occupied housing. I have not heard anyone, including me, say on-site inclusionary requirements alone will meet the needs of the city's housing insecure residents. I don't even know why that's in the staff report because no one said it. All goals are important. I am focusing my housing advocacy on inclusionary owner-occupied, referencing number 2 and 6 and the staff's conclusions about the current AHO. If the city is serious about repairing the decades of damage done by discriminatory housing policy, and I mean decades of discriminatory law, then the inclusionary low-income owner-occupied policies are a critical and key component of any affordable housing ordinance. Equity requires this. Yes, it is hard. Yes, it requires major staff time, but this is what leadership is about, finding a way to do it. Direct the staff to look into the experience of other cities who require developers build a minimum % of on-site owner-occupied housing. In other words, other cities that have this kind of policy. There are cities, even in the Bay Area, that have been doing this, requiring developers to build inclusionary housing. What have they learned and how can their experience help Hayward? Giving developers the choice has not worked. For example, where is the inclusionary housing and the developments at Mission Hills, Sohay, Mission Village, and Mission Crossings? I'll tell you where, nowhere, zero. All of these developments gave the developer the authority to decide on inclusionary housing or in lieu fees. The developer chose in lieu fees, the path of least resistance and thus greater profit. Developers are making profits and moderate and low income residents are going homeless and unable to enter the housing market. In this economic climate and emerging from COVID, developers will be willing to follow the requirements of the city of Hayward as long as the policies are clear, consistent, and fair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Aguilar. Could you please mute yourself?
Yes.
And with that, Seeing no other attendees, we will close public comment and move into question and comments from the commissioners. So open season, and we'll start with Commissioner Roche.
Thank you, Chair Kenda. Excuse me. I had some questions, and then I'll give you feedback on the listed questions that you gave. I was wondering, because I know with the in lieu fees that we leverage that money. So I know there's this idea that for every dollar in lieu fee, there's some, it sort of equates to some amount in leveraged money. But maybe part of the problem in the in lieu fees is that it seems so intangible. Like when that money goes somewhere, it kind of goes into a void. And so are there then sort of reports and feedback we can get about what's happening with the in lieu fee and when projects are going to come online? Because I know the other criticism is that money sits there in a pot and it's years later before an affordable unit comes online. So it's kind of hard to equate the two when we're looking at a developer who we can say, build on site, and we know that's going to come online the same time as the market rate housing. So just to you, Christina, what can we do to track the in lieu fees and, make that more, like I said, obvious or tangible somehow?
Yeah, so with the affordable housing, since they are leveraging funds, they are doing multiple applications with state funding and tax credit. So sometimes it does take some time in order for the project to start construction. However, we are looking at, under our next notice of funding availability, to establish a pipeline. So where we would actually not necessarily have the money in hand at the time that we do the notice of funding availability, but kind of set up a wait list. So as we receive sufficient funds, we would be able to award the money to the projects. This is all subject to council's approval of the pipeline, but it's one way that we have looked at trying to accelerate the production of affordable housing. We've also seen with some of the projects that are going through the streamlined entitlement process and with a sizable contribution from the city's A1 funds and the inclusionary ordinance, that project substantially accelerated and is currently under construction. And we're expecting to see the next affordable housing project start construction in the fall. And so while it takes some time, if we can have a continual pipeline, we will see the number of units built. If you notice, there was one slide that discussed the number of units that were being created using the in lieu fees. Mm-hmm. So we are building a pipeline of them, including one of the projects under the 238 projects will provide additional units of affordable housing. So we're getting there, and that pipeline is growing.
Okay.
And if I could I just jump in? This is Jennifer,
Sure.
Assistant City Manager. I just want to say, I think it's a great idea, and something we could also do is an informational report. Maybe it's every year where we just give the Planning Commission an update on what units got built using the fee, so that we can also be providing you better information on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think maybe sort of having the obvious sort of like these dollars went to this, and so they're all being built. And then going back to the on-site. Because I too have desire to see on-site home ownership, affordable housing home ownership being built, because I think it's a way to keep families in Hayward, to know that they can sort of step up to an actual home ownership unit. And I understand that there's a burden on staff, so and that's real, and I understand that. But because I like the idea that these affordable units are spread throughout the city in the market rate development. So there's a mixed use, mixed income level in housing throughout the city. So what can be done to ease that burden? So if, like you said, you have a smaller, like a 4-unit place, and one of them is going to be affordable, and I can understand that's a burden on both the owner developer and the city. I mean, are there other models in other cities where maybe there's like a property manager type person that handles this? And I understand that would be more money spent doing it, but could that happen so that we can just sort of accept that we have a priority of wanting on-site built, and if the developer is willing to do that, but that burden on staff is somehow streamlined somewhere else? Are there other models like that? Because just wondering, because I understand the burden. I know this is real.
We have been looking for years to find somebody who can administer the program for us so that we don't have to do it. And it would cost the same amount as funding another position in our division. So we were trying to see if we could find a way to make it easier for people. We have been linking them with the county's housing portal for marketing some of the units, and that's helped some. But there are a lot of nuances in development, and not having the experience on some of these smaller projects just creates more time for staff. If the question is, do we want to be working on these smaller projects, or do we want to be spending our time that would something that would have a bigger impact on addressing housing affordability? So we have to look at those trade-offs. So which one makes more sense? And so we could look at, as part of this feasibility study, what makes sense in terms of what the threshold is for considering a project too small, and what is that line where we should really be focusing. These are the types of projects that we should require on-site affordable ownership units. And these are the types of projects that we should just accept the fee so that we can do the other things like prioritizing rental for those that need rental housing. So that would be the idea with the feasibility study. We could look at that in much more detail.
Yeah, I'm glad you'd be looking at that. And then, yeah, and maybe that can also include, like, if we didn't do that and we accepted the smaller units, what would a management of that look like? Like you said, maybe another staffer or an outside third party management. The other thing I wondered, what's the difference between in lieu, like developer paying in lieu versus offsite?
So offsite, they would choose, they may have a different development project where they choose to provide the affordable units. I've seen projects.
And so they're building the units while they're building their market rate. They're building their units.
So they might, yeah, they would do their affordable project, whatever it is, and maybe they would buy a smaller property somewhere else that they could then choose to turn affordable. Okay. So we haven't seen any proposals like that yet, though.
Okay. And then the other question I had is, I know, so, you said we really are, we haven't had market rate rental come in since 2018. So, and will the feasibility study look at what other factors there may be that it may not be a deterrent from our affordable housing ordinance, but, building costs, wondering how people are really going to behave in the work world going forward post-COVID. I mean, are all those things going to be looked at? And, because maybe it's not the housing ordinance.
They probably won't be exploring why, but they will look at right now what the costs of development are. So including the construction costs, which we know has escalated a lot, and then see how much room there is available in order to impose a fee or the on-site requirement. In the last feasibility study, the per square foot fee was equivalent to the revenue reduction for the on-site. So they were comparable amounts at the time. So they would do the similar analysis to see how much of this additional cost or loss of revenue a project could absorb and still be feasible.
Could I just add, we just did a feasibility study for the traffic impact fee, because that's also a similar type of fee, right, that increases costs. And that study found that the market rate rental housing, so high density housing, is kind of very marginally feasible. And so our recommendation in that case is to actually not put a traffic impact fee on high density market rate housing because of the concern of making it infeasible or more infeasible. I also know that the city of San Carlos just adopted some changes, and they opted to not make any changes to their the high density market rate fee because of concerns over feasibility as well. So it's not just us that's looking at that.
Yeah, I was wondering if you look, yeah.
And just so folks know why, is because that type of construction typically requires either kind of parking, and that's structured parking, which is much more expensive. The type of construction, it's more expensive. And so even though you think, oh, you're getting more units, but because of the cost of construction is more to build that type of housing, it's actually a lot less, it's more sensitive to some of these cost increases.
Okay. Thanks. And then the other question I had is about consistency, because I can see how, if a developer comes in and they don't really know what the rules are, so they can pay the in lieu, they can build on site, but then they come to like the planning commission and we're like, well, build more on site. And I can see that there's a concern for like, what are they really signing up for? So, I mean, I guess that's another thing to look at, like, what can we do to streamline it so that we have some, leverage, to get them to build more affordable or pay in lieu, but also just the consistency of it. Cause I can understand that you come to a city and you need to know what what you're dealing with, so that you can, just to sort of pencil it out and make sure that it is the kind of profit that they're looking for, and yet this still meeting the city's need for affordable housing. So maybe that something in the feasible city also, Christina, you're going to be looking at how to streamline and make it more consistent.
Yes, and I think that's kind of what I mentioned, being strategic about looking at what's going to make sense in terms of, I think it's to your point, the idea is to make it clear to everyone what the expectation is. But we want to do the analysis on which projects does it make sense to require those on-site units, and which projects does it make sense to maybe only require the fee, and still give them the option to do on-site if they so choose.
Yeah, because I can understand, even if they're tough, restrictions on affordable housing, and then we're demanding a lot, just the consistency of knowing that would be enough for them to be able to see, just to see how that goes. Okay, so getting to your questions. So as far as, what are our goals for revising the AHO? I would want to look at, making sure we're taking care of the people that are at risk of displacement. So we keep people in the homes that they're in, or the rental units that they're in, and then providing, more on-site home ownership for families is a big, priority for me. So even though they're smaller units, I still would want to see us prioritize asking developers to build on-site. And then for question number 2, well, I guess I think I answered question number 2 first. And then the goals, I guess providing a mixture of housing opportunities. And that was another question I had. Sorry, guys, one more, I promise. On the RHNA goals, it seems like the RHNA goals are so high for everyone in the state. They feel unattainable. And I hear a lot of people talk about sort of just being dismissive of them. It seems like we need to find a way to create that incentive without having it be so astronomical that people are just dismissing them. So are you facing that? Are you worried about that?
I would say that when we look at the mixture of tools we have, I think the point in the slide was that it would be really hard if we were just looking at on-site requirements to meet our RHNA goals. But if we're also looking at our opportunities to sell public lands, we're subsidizing affordable housing, we're leveraging the density bonus. When we're looking at all the different tools that we have to create affordable housing, if we can properly align those tools with the right types of projects, then we would be more successful at getting close to meeting those RHNA goals. So I think that's one of the things we would like to do in terms of meeting. We want to primarily meet the needs of the Hayward residents, and then secondary to try to achieve meeting those RHNA goals.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Roche. We'll keep moving right along. Commissioner Ollie Sullivan.
Chair Ken, also good to see you. Good to see everyone this evening. Appreciate the staff presentation and report, very comprehensive. I will try and be quick here. So 2 questions. The first is on key finding number 4. And as Commissioner Roche mentioned, she honed in on this one, which I also sort of wanted to dig into and reiterate a lot of what she said here. The question I have is this presumed correlation between the updated affordable housing ordinance from 2018 and the fact that no large-scale market rate housing projects have been entitled. And I guess the question / comment I have here is obviously correlation is not causation, and I wouldn't want us to assume that because we increased some of those requirements, the impact of that was a reduction in affordable housing, and therefore we should look at adjusting the 2018 adjustments, if that makes sense. And so I don't know if it's possible as part of the external consulting study to really sort of try and identify, well, is there a reason for that? There could be other sort of external factors, as Chair Roche mentioned, that are creating sort of the fact that we haven't had projects entitled, and it's not because of the updates to the affordable housing ordinance. So just wanted to put that out there for staff. I don't know if that is something that they can look into, but that finding, I wouldn't want us to assume that it's an impact of the 2018 updates. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, and I just want to, yes, it does. But I also think even if it's not because of the cost of the fee itself, like because that change, what we do know just from other cities that are doing this is that costs in general are very high right now and are making that type of housing product infeasible in a lot of places or marginal. So what we do know is by increasing costs to that, then you're more likely, right? So even if we can't say for sure it was the ordinance changes, what we do know are the high construction costs right now are really impacting that housing type. So we'd want to be really careful to do anything to increase costs further.
That's fair. And then the second key finding number 7, I found this one very interesting as well. It makes a lot of sense, right? If you're dealing with small projects, as staff noted, it's probably a less sophisticated developer that doesn't have the same level of support that a professional developer might have, and that creates, arguably even more impact on staff for less outcome, right? Like for a much smaller amount of outcome. And so I think this is one that we want to look at as part of the study to see like what are opportunities to sort of alleviate some of these concerns from the staff side, because 40 hours on a project that's 2 units versus 40 hours on a project that's 400 units. We need to be looking at where the impact is most applicable here, and so that's an important key finding, I think. A question though, and to clarify, in the staff report, it noted that the 2018 changes brought down the applicability to from a 20-unit project to a 2-unit project. And so would that mean in effect that if, let's say, I bought a large lot and I asked for it to be subdivided to allow for 2 homes to be built on it, would I, as let's say an individual, be impacted by the affordable housing ordinance in that case?
Yes, so if you had a single family lot and subdivided it, developed 2 units, 1 on each lot, the affordable housing ordinance would apply to your project. The fee, however, is a lesser amount because the fee is tiered.
Got it. And it would have to be fee because you obviously wouldn't be building a unit, right? So
they would have the option if they chose to provide 50% of the units affordable, but it would likely that they would pay the fee.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. And then as far as the discussion questions, just a couple quick thoughts for question number 1. What are the goals of revising the affordable housing ordinance? I think the ultimate goal here should be to create an environment in the city that stimulates development, that in turn stimulates affordable housing, right? And so how do we ensure that from an environmental standpoint, we're creating impact fees that still allow for development, but also allow for affordable housing? The other piece of that, very associated to it, would be ensuring some type of consistency within the area, right? I wouldn't want to see our ordinance be massively out of step with adjacent East Bay cities. I think we need to sort of think about this from a regional perspective, because all else being equal, if I'm a developer and I have twice as much of a burden on the affordable housing requirements in Hayward versus San Leandro, that could be a deciding factor. And so looking sort of regionally, what are other cities doing in the East Bay to have some level of consistency? I think we can still be a leader, but still having that level of consistency from a regional perspective. And then the third goal, I think, is also, again, associated, but recognizing the economic shifts that we've seen over the last, in this case, 5 years since the ordinance was last adjusted, I think will be important. And then as far as discussion question number 2, target populations, again, it's hard to say, who should we be targeting, right? All of these 8 or 9 examples, I think, are all important. One of the keys that just sort of comes to mind, and as Commissioner Roche also mentioned, for me, I would like to see ways that we can ensure that people that are already housed or that are sort of at that unstable tipping point can either stay in their homes or are treated, right? And so folks in the example A, housing instability, and then example F, so individuals at risk of homelessness, right? People that are at risk of basically falling out of housing, I think are 2 of the populations that I would like us to ensure that the ordinance is serving. That's all for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Ali Sullivan. Commissioner Bonilla.
Thank you, Chair Okenda. Thank you for the report, Christina. Just a couple quick questions. Aligning with what Commissioner Ali Sullivan was saying around, looking at what the region is doing in this space, I think is important, because I would like to see us kind of hit the roof or go as high as we possibly can go with this ordinance, right? So I think that we should be considerate of what the region is doing, but let's really push. I mean, Hayward's a gem. It's a great place to live. It's a great place to develop. So I would like to see us kind of stretch those boundaries as much as possible when we do this study, and, you know, to see what are those boundaries. The other thing that I'm interested in is, you know, how do we further incentivize on-site affordable housing? I'm not saying get rid of in lieu fees, but I think what you're hearing pretty consistently is there is a desire, and even we heard it from the caller who called in, to build inclusionary on-site affordable. So how do we incentivize that over almost making it a 50-50 decision on, you know, should I come in with in lieu fees or should I come in with, I mean, it's almost like a coin toss to the developer. And I'm wondering how we could, you know, incentivize them in whatever way to build on-site as much as possible. I loved the comment that Commissioner Roche made around, you know, and thank you so much, Assistant City Manager, for your offer around, you know, publishing some kind of annual report to create more transparency with how in lieu fees are being used and applied, I think is really important. And I think that it's also important for us to understand how they're being leveraged with other funds to do, you know, more than what they could have otherwise done on their own. So it gives us a broader perspective on the impact that those funds are having within our community. As it relates to the smaller projects, you know, I was kind of thinking, well, would it be easier just to kind of accept an in lieu fee for those projects, because I understand the burden that it creates for staff? But then I thought, is there a way of exploring a super streamlined process for smaller projects that may not necessarily require as much effort as a larger development? Don't know, but I mean, maybe it's something we can explore, right? So that we still do have those as an option, but it's not such a heavy administrative burden. And then I think that there's a need to, you know, this gap of 4,600 units is concerning, but I would say we need, you know, the purpose of this revision for the ordinance is, I liked your idea, Christina, of, you know, creating flexibility to be able to meet the needs of Hayward, right? So I don't want this ordinance to be so rigid, you know, we get locked into something that doesn't work for us. But then also we don't want it to be so vague, you know, developers are coming to the Planning Commission and running into a wall because they're not aligned with our desire to build on-site inclusionary affordable housing. So I think, you know, that's one of the goals. I would say I'm very interested in rental, you know, affordable rental housing and how we incentivize the development of that. You know, so maybe as part of this study, we really kind of focus on that. Because, you know, we heard a lot from the Hayward community, you know, from renters in particular, that they're the ones who are kind of being outpriced of, you know, the homes that they're living in, and they're the ones that are being most impacted by gentrification in the city. So how we prioritize them staying in the city or creating more opportunities for affordable rental housing is super important. I love the idea of also focusing on home ownership. And looking at ways to, you know, continue to incentivize, you know, density as a way of meeting these goals. Prioritizing low income, you know, to very low income individuals and families, I think is important. Working to remove as many barriers as possible, I think is also important. So maybe we can look at other cities to see, you know, what best practices are regionally. I'm sure you guys have done that, and I'm sure we're, you know, probably leaders in this space, but just removing as many barriers, like, you know, even providing down payment assistance, I think is really important. So those are, you know, the comments that I wanted to share this evening.
Commissioner Bonilla, could I ask you a follow-up question?
Yes.
When you say about wanting to incentivize market rate rental housing, would that include, if you were to ask developers, they'd say reduce costs. So they'd actually say reduce the fee. Is there any appetite for that type of housing, not ownership, which I understand, and we think feasibly could support potentially more or deeper affordability? Would that be something that you'd be open to considering?
Absolutely. I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
I didn't understand that point, Jennifer. Could you make that again?
Sure. Well, I heard Commissioner Bonilla say that he really wanted to incentivize market rate rental housing and high density housing. And I just wanted to know, is it on the table to consider actually reducing the fee for that type of housing, not ownership housing, which we think could support potentially more, but would there be an appetite? Because if you were to ask developers, they're going to say reduce costs because costs are crazy high right now. That type of product has structured parking. So would we be willing to at least consider and put on the table the idea of actually reducing our fee for that type of product?
Yeah, I don't see why not.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Stevens? Oh, I can't hear you, Commissioner Stevens. Doesn't look like you're muted, but your sound is not coming through. Can't hear you.
You have me now?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for having this wonderful presentation. And thank you especially to Ms. Morlis and Ms. Ott. I really appreciate what you've done here today. And I know this is a tremendously difficult topic. And I just have a couple of quick questions and a few comments. And the first one is, will this study outreach to the development community to kind of gauge their opinion about where things are?
Yes, we would anticipate that we would include outreach to the developers in the study.
So earlier this week, I was in Los Altos and I was walking along First Street, and I noticed 6 large-scale podium buildings being constructed, residential. And I think it's a perfect example of a community where the revenue obtained by the developer on the project far exceeds the costs, and it's plausible to build things in those communities. And I think we have to be realistic about things. You know, housing is built by the private development community, and private development community must earn a profit. And if they can't earn a profit, they're not going to build. And right now, most of the construction in the Bay Area is on the peninsula of the South Bay in San Francisco. And it's a simple fact, as Ms. Morlis mentioned, that the revenue in those communities far exceeds the costs. In the last, 10 years or so, construction costs have escalated, and they've escalated more than the consumer price index. So I would not be building any models around changes in construction costs. And I think we need to be really realistic. We don't see a considerable amount of development in this community for the simple reason that the development community does not see a high degree of revenue here. So, and I know for a fact, because I've actually participated with developers in this community looking at projects, and I know that a rental high density or low density or medium density project just does not pencil because rents just are not high enough in this section of East Bay. So when I look at the rules, my eyes glaze over related to affordable housing. Because to me, it seems complex, convoluted. I'm not going to make that much money here, so why bother? Why not just go to a community where I can make a quicker buck? Because frankly, this city is in competition with other parts of the Bay Area. So I've always wondered why, rather than charge a fee, why couldn't there be some sort of incentive to create affordable housing within a development? Like, why could some of these in lieu fees not go back to the actual developer and help subsidize some of these units? And I realize that there's the density goals and everything else along those lines, but in my practice, I found those not really to pencil and work out in the cycles. I'm just curious about that. Why can we not, until we hit that critical mass where we actually have development really progressing, why can't we offer a carrot rather than a stick?
I think part of the question, well, one of the options is the density bonus. So we can use the density bonus to incentivize, to reduce costs to the developer and incentivize the inclusion of affordable units. In terms of providing fees on the market rate project, part of that we would be subsidizing a market rate project. We would want to know that we're not actually subsidizing profit. So we would have to get more information about the development that typically market rate developers would want to provide us on such a development. So we could look into it, but I would think that it may be difficult for the city to provide a subsidy to a for-profit developer who is looking to make profit off of it.
Yeah. And I just like to pick up on the fact that what Christina said up front was that we have lots of tools, and the density bonus is really what you're talking about, is that carrot and that incentive, whereas affordable housing ordinance is a little more of the stick. And so we do see like all these tools kind of functioning together. So I just want to kind of emphasize that point because I think it was really important up front.
No, I appreciate that. I hear what you're saying. I'm just not sold on the density bonus. I mean, in certain conditions, I'm just not sold on it. And then the final item, I'm really a fan of, in your question number one, I'm really a fan of the mixture of housing opportunities. I think it's really important to build neighborhoods that have, various housing styles and types and densities. But I think that's a lot easier to say than actually do in practice, because when you take a parcel and you try to sell it off, right? A developer wants a consistency of units because that's what the housing community wants to build. They want to build, on an assembly line. So I really think flexibility in how that's crafted is ultimately what's going to win, because building more units in the city will eventually draw down costs. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Stevens. Commissioner Goldstein.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I apologize. I broke my camera while I was trying to fix it. And I think maybe the only solution is to reboot my computer, but I don't want to miss out on the conversation. So if it's okay with you all, you can, I guess, just accept the fact that my camera is not working. So it's a disturbing trend to learn that the affordable housing ordinance is not leading to more homes being built. And there could be several coincidental causes. I think that with the demand for housing being as strong as it is, that probably affordability or profit margins to the developers, especially the big developers that are able to squeeze pretty good margins out, can't imagine that that's really going to be huge. I think we probably need not to rely on our intuition on that, but to actually scientifically evaluate what those numbers actually mean to the investors. And if that becomes a problem, then we need to look at perhaps co-investing so that they're not, the builders aren't necessarily putting all their money on the line. And there's a couple of different ways that we can do that. One of them is financially, literally being a capital investor, replacing their bank. If they're using a bank and they're paying a higher interest rate, we could subsidize that until it's built and then to get paid back on the sale of the property. Another way to do that potentially is to provide creative financing to the buyer, so that rather than having the builder take the loss on profit, if in fact that's happening, that we're subsidizing some portion of that loss to make it easier for low income and very low income persons to buy the property. Now, I can tell you, despite a gut feeling that some people have about poverty, it is not a permanent affliction. People actually are able to rise above, and sometimes dramatically rise above, go from extreme poverty to extreme wealth. And while that's not the high percentile, the fact is that most people in our economy do move up through the economic ladder. And that means that if we adjusted our current model of financing from a mortgage amortization that's an equal amount over 360 months, and instead backloaded the loan, that would be one way to improve affordability. Now, I know that that's all beyond the scope of what we're able to achieve, but it is something to keep in mind, something that we can advocate. I think there's a new agency called the Bay Area Housing Lending Finance Agency or something like that. And this could be a topic that we could advance through them. So creative financing is one way that we could really restore balance in the marketplace. I think from perspective of priorities, for me, having affordable properties for rent and purchase should be our highest priority. I don't think it's advantageous to us as a community to unintentionally see, by way of our housing market, see people who have lived in our area for a decade or more, suddenly either they or their children have to leave because of housing insecurity. I think that's housing affordability. So I think that should be a top priority. And the other priority should be keeping people housed. So housing insecurity is a major problem, and anyone that's lived through the 2008 crisis can fully comprehend how 90 days of inability to pay causes you to lose your house, maybe a house that you've lived in for 10 years and built up significant equity. And because of market conditions, now the property is not worth what you paid for it. Those combination of circumstances should not happen in our society. We need banking regulations that actually support people staying in their homes and not, really kind of doing it the way that it works now. I'm strongly opposed to how it works now, and I really strongly advocate for housing security, keep people housed. It's actually a lot more expensive and a lot more damaging and a lot more emotionally disturbing to be upsetting people's place of dwelling, and much better overall for the economy and for the family to keep them housed. So that's a huge topic there. And I also believe we do need to preserve on-site inclusionary housing as much as possible. Now, I understand that there's still some resistance to that. There's kind of this pervasive, somewhat ancient belief that poor people shouldn't live in a rich neighborhood. And I don't mean to oversimplify the problem, because, quite literally, people have all these different concerns about crime and whether people are going to get along and whether they have the same skills to be able to, creatively solve relationship problems over, things like parking and weeds and grass mowing and stuff like that. So I don't mean to oversimplify that, but the fact is that services, schools, shopping, and all of the other things that go with a nice neighborhood, I'll let you decide what you consider to be a nice neighborhood. I think everybody deserves to have access to that. And I think that inclusionary housing really speaks volumes to our ability to understand that just because somebody's poor doesn't make them a poor neighbor. Know what I mean? These are still good people. And the more that we include good people in good neighborhoods, the better overall the goodness of our wider community. So I strongly support that. And again, I think a lot of this is really going to come down to creative financing measures. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Goldstein. Commissioner Lowe. Saving the best for last, I'm sure.
Thank you, Chair. And also thank you, staff. That was really, really succinct, and you really gave it to us in a way that even I could understand. So thank you for that. My question, I want to go back to what Commissioner Roche asked about a little bit, and that is the affordable unit option and the fact that you said that no developers really jumped on that yet. So I wanted to know, what does the data say about that as an effective strategy? Because there must be some data or some reason why we implemented that as a strategy in the first place. And then the second part of my question is, why do you think that no developer has jumped on that as an effective strategy?
Yes, thank you for the question. And just to clarify, I think what we've seen is that the on-site inclusionary has been effective for ownership housing. We've seen projects include the on-site for ownership. It's within the rental only that what we haven't seen is the development of rental housing. So because there's no rental housing being developed, there's no way for any on-site rental units to be developed. So until we can get some rental projects being proposed, we cannot encourage them to even include the on-site units. What we had seen prior to in the feasibility study in 2017 is that there were actually 4 higher density rental projects that had been proposed at that time. And they were paying a substantially lower fee. So their fee was about between $3 and $4 per habitable square foot. So of those 3 projects, only I think 2 of them had started construction. One of them has not started construction at all, and one of them has gone back to the city to be re-entitled. So we have not seen even those projects that had been approved prior to the last revision haven't been completed. So there's a big concern about the feasibility of rental housing in general being built in the city of Hayward. And then when we add the affordable housing in lieu fee or the on-site requirement, which reduces revenue, we make it less feasible. So it becomes even harder to develop that type of housing because we've just increased the cost or reduced the revenue. So we are looking at what the analysis said in 2017, seeing what's happened in terms of production over these last 4 years. We're coming to the conclusion that it's not effective as a tool to create rental housing because no rental housing in general is being built.
What about off-site units?
So the rental housing we're seeing built is 100% affordable housing projects that have had subsidies. So we're not seeing any rental housing, market rate rental housing being built. So the offsite option is also not happening. The only place we're seeing rental housing being built and higher density rental housing is with the 100% affordable projects that have either received development subsidy from the city, have entered into disposition and sale agreement with the city, or have received other subsidies from the state.
And Commissioner Lowe, just to be, I think, were you asking about the offsite option? I just wanted to be clear. Okay. Do you want us to answer why we would have included that as part of the original ordinance? I just want to make sure we're answering.
That's what I was trying to find out, because it seemed to me like it hasn't been effective. Yeah. And so I wanted to see what the thoughts were behind it.
So sometimes you would include that because developers might own different parcels of land. So they might own one parcel here, another somewhere else. So it just gives a little extra flexibility that they might decide to do, the city might own some land and do a land swap or something where they might do something on our land. So provide some flexibility, but honestly, and Christina might have her opinion too, but my thought is that it's so complicated to get a project, even a project entitled on one piece of land in one location with one neighborhood. When you bring in a whole nother site, now you're dealing with 2 neighborhoods, you're dealing with 2 applications, that it's just more complicated and just isn't worth it. That's kind of my opinion, based on, what my experience working in development. I don't know, Christina, if you have another thought about why offsite housing options not being used.
And it seems also like it would be even more or greater burden on staff.
Mm-hmm. We would have to record a restriction on one property and then supervise the development on another. I have seen it in another jurisdiction where a developer purchased a quadruplex condoized it, and then turned that into the affordable component of their project. So my understanding, I wasn't here when the last revisions happened, but the providing as many options and flexibility to developers as possible. However, we have a very broad ability to propose an alternative plan. So that could still cover if a developer had that offsite option as a way to comply, even if we removed it.
Thank you. I wanted to go back and talk about something Commissioner Ali Sullivan said, and talking about consistency with the cities around us. I do agree that we need to be consistent with the cities that are surrounding us. I do, however, really want to point out that I want to make sure that we still are one of the more affordable cities in the Bay Area when all is said and done with whatever we decide to do as far as revisions to our ordinance are concerned, because 22 years ago when I moved to Hayward, I couldn't afford to live pretty much anywhere else in the Bay Area. And we started looking in Oakland, then we went to San Leandro, and we just kept moving down and realized, oh, this is a place we can actually afford. And I'm sort of proud of the fact that we have a city that is more affordable than most of our surrounding cities. So I'd like to make sure that we keep that, yes, we definitely want to be a city that people want to move to and that sort of thing. But I also want to echo what some of the other commissioners have said, in that we do not want to displace the residents that live here already. So I do want to make sure that we continue to be affordable, and that equity is a part of everything that we do as it relates to housing. I want to answer the questions. Let me go to the page where you have the questions. The goals, I think one of the top goals for me is providing a mixture of housing opportunities to meet various housing needs, because I think Hayward is extremely diverse in many, many different ways. We have large families, we have small families, we have people who make lots of money, people who make a lot less money, and all sorts of different ways. We're diverse. So I think our housing needs to be diverse as well to meet the needs of the people that live here. Of course, like I said, equity is very important to me, as well as making sure that we don't displace our residents. Going to question 2, are the specific populations that are important. Gosh, it's hard to choose. I do think that anyone who's at risk of being displaced or becoming homeless should be one of our top priorities. But I do want to add a category in there, not to make it worse, but I do want to add teachers. I think we have students in there, but I didn't see teachers. And I think, especially now that we have a teaching shortage, we really need to create some housing that is affordable for people who are at the level of teachers, which I would assume might be moderate income, but I'm not sure. It might even be low based upon the salaries that teachers have, especially an entry-level teacher. So those are the things that I would find to be most important. But I just want to reiterate, it is really hard to choose one thing and make that the priority, because we really need to try to do all of the things and be well-rounded. But equity, I think, should be at the forefront of everything that we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lowe. All right. It's got some double dippers over here. All right. That's fine. Commissioner Ali Sullivan, go ahead.
The conversation stimulated more thoughts. That's all.
I know it's all exciting. It's very exciting.
Very, very brief here. And Commissioner Lowe, thank you for your last comment, which actually stimulated my thought here. In regards to discussion question 2 and target populations, as the son of a former public school teacher, I appreciate the fact that you raised that point. At the risk of broadening it, though, I'm wondering if either through the affordable housing ordinance or through other means, we target housing opportunities for Hayward staff. And I say from first responders, so police, fire, and other sort of city employees that ideally you would have the folks that are serving the community, living in the community. And so if there's a way to broaden that to beyond just teachers, but other folks that are serving the community in Hayward to be able to afford to live here would be ideal. That was only comment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Commissioner Roche.
Thanks, Chair. I'll try to be quick. I just, when you do, figure out how to make the in lieu fee information more transparent, I was thinking it'd be really interesting to know, like, if for every dollar of in lieu fee, it's, it's sort of like factored, like increased by factor of 3, for example, does that get us close to what the building on site rate might be for a developer? It would just be interesting to see in the future how, like, we could look at that sort of the inflated dollar for built units would be really interesting to me in the future. So thank you. That's all, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Lowe, just want to make sure your hand's up. Do you have anything else to say?
No, I'm sorry. I'll take it.
No problem. I just double checking. All right. So I've been very patient. I have a lot to say on this. I've been advocating on the affordable housing ordinance since like late 2016. So I'm right there with it. Oh boy. First, I just want to say thank you, staff, for putting together the presentation. I'm all in favor of this conversation and waiting for it. And, I've been thinking about it a lot and, about how this kind of feasibility analysis can be done as a public policy person. Like, I was thinking of, like, how would I even create such an analysis? I've been really deep in the weeds on this. So I'm going to not go there, but I just want to say I've said this stuff before in 2018 or 2017 when this was kind of being considered, but some of the stuff I'm going to share, it's a regurgitation a little bit. But for me, the affordable housing ordinance, it was said by one of the speakers, is not something that stands on its own. It stands with all the other tools that we have in our toolbox. This is not a fix-all solution, and we have to consider it alongside our density bonus ordinance, which we just reviewed and is, and it's sort of getting finalized for passage, I'm hoping, to, go into effect and hopefully buttress what is being done with the AHO in the long term. I'd also, was speaking about this back in 2018. We've done a good job, I think, with the 238 properties. I personally think I would have wanted to push for more affordable housing rather than market rate, but I understand the reasons why that was done. But I think we need something akin to a public lands for public good ordinance or policy in the city that poses guidelines for how we use our underutilized public surplus lands. We have a Surplus Lands Act in California that sets some kinds of baselines, but I think as a city, we need to, set those for ourselves and very likely identify and prioritize affordable housing as the public good that we use surplus lands for. And I mean, mostly we've done that with the 238 projects. But I think we have a lot more land and a lot more process that we can do to identify other parcels for even smaller or different kinds of developments. This gets me kind of to the point on the question on in lieu fees, which I'm curious about how the feasibility analysis will go. But for me, I recall speaking at public comment in 2017 alongside folks from the affordable housing development community, like Eden Housing and East Bay Community Housing, or something like that. But what they were saying, they rely a lot on our housing trust fund dollars and our affordable housing fund trust fund dollars. And, I think, I don't know, I wouldn't want to see the in lieu fees be lowered. And I'll get to why I think not, but in a little while, but I know we have all of these other components that I don't see the city more aggressively acting on in a way that it tries to influence sort of state legislation. I want to see our city supporting changes and improvements to our low-income housing tax credit policies in the state level, and also repealing California Constitution Article 34, so we can build and participate in building more easily units like the city can get. Right now, it's virtually impossible for us to be involved in a process of financing and developing public housing alongside with the state. And, it requires this whole voting procedure and all this business. And so I think as a city, that's just something that we need to bring into the conversation, because social housing, public housing is ultimately a way that we have more control to be able to build units that doesn't rely just on private development. That's my soapbox. So I acknowledge that in the staff report, there was, mention about this kind of not being the sole cause of development not happening, but among a confluence of other issues that have been, impacting every sector all over our country in regards to like COVID-19 and supply chain disruptions, and then also just labor shortages in the building trades. So, there's a lot of factors right now that are kind of in a little bit of a perfect storm. I put in the comments that I sent, the questions I sent beforehand, the California Construction Cost Index says that essentially the costs have gone up over 25%. It's 25.7% since this ordinance went into effect in February 2018. So from February 2018 to February 2022, 25.7% increases in construction costs. I don't think that's a permanent thing. So I bring this up only because I'm kind of an internal optimist, and I think there will find an equilibrium in these costs. I think the labor market will begin to equilibrate. I don't know what the word for that is, but I think find equilibrium. And to me, I mention this because I'm worried that the feasibility analysis focusing on construction costs as they are today would skew the potential for, or would skew how any kind of results would how should I say this? Would skew how the perceived impact of AHO would be on future developments. That's the way I'll put it. So I'm just concerned about that. So, I kind of just want to make a note that when we're putting in the request for proposals, I don't know how much control we have over this, but I would really like to see that there's a long-term construction cost average that is used as opposed to current construction costs, because I think that will impact how much of the AHO is deemed feasible. I know it's not like that's not necessarily dealing in current conditions, but we also can't be reviewing this every year to make a decision on, the current market costs and doing a feasibility study every year. So I think we have to think into the future about, in my view, optimistically, that, that's not going to be crazy all for, next several years. It's going to find some equilibrium and builders will build. Costs will go down and this AHO will not be infeasible as it currently is, or maybe with some increases. Okay, so having said all that, I think I'll just close on the goals. I just wanted all that to kind of be on the record. But my goals, I think, are going to focus on the people who are most at risk of displacement. And when I say that, I'm thinking of the need, like we cannot do away with inclusionary requirements. In fact, I even if a feasibility analysis kind of was, unfavorable for the reasons I just stated about the inflated costs at this time, I would want to see at the very least the inclusionary requirements stay the same, if not increase. But I would not want to see those reduced. And similarly, because I recognize how important in lieu fees are to our subsidizing housing development from affordable housing developers, especially if we're talking about using our surplus public land, we need to have money in the bank. And so, I'm also really not interested in reducing fees personally. And I think, of course, as a level-headed public policy person, I'm going to be open-minded and see what comes back with the feasibility study. I'm not attached to these outcomes. I think that's going to determine a lot of how this conversation goes. But, I don't want to see either of those things happen at the very least. And so kind of to your question a little bit ago, Jennifer, about, lowering some of the in lieu fees, like that is not my position. And then for those who we serve, I think focusing on families, as Commissioner Roche mentioned, that to me is, the most important. I mean, I know we have to help our seniors, veterans, foster youth, I know there's a lot of folks out there that, we need to help. And I think that the starting point is, for me, struggling families, because families are kind of, in my opinion, the bedrock of a community. Kids in the district, working parents. And I think that to me is the kind of core constituency, if you will, that we need to be thinking about not displacing. And I speak of that selfishly because I know somebody who deals with the school district. So I'll just say that. But those are my comments. And I see Commissioner Lowe, you have also raised your hand again. So happy to let you go for it.
Thanks. You just made me think of a question that might actually not be a smart question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So based upon what Chair Okenda said, it sounds like we as a city, our only option for building affordable housing is just sitting around waiting for private developers to come to us. And is that true? Or is there a way that we are actively, wooing them or recruiting them? Like, how does that work? And again, forgive my ignorance, but I just didn't realize that if that's our only way of getting affordable housing in our city, no wonder meeting our RHNA goals seems completely unattainable.
So luckily, it's not the only way to create affordable housing. So the Affordable Housing Ordinance is one tool, and this tool relies on market rate development. So it both creates the on-site units, the inclusionary units, and it helps generate the fee revenue. But the city can also look for opportunities to negotiate and leverage with developers when they sell public land. The city can use affordable housing funds to subsidize the development of affordable housing. And in those types of projects, the city has more ability to craft a project that suits the needs of the community. We can set minimum requirements to serve extremely low income housing or extremely low income populations. So we have more flexibility when we're using our own funds or we're using our lands in order to create affordable housing. With this larger overarching policy that's being imposed on market rate development, we have to think more globally because we can't do the one size fits all and evaluate it on a per property type level. So we have to be very thoughtful of what might impact certain types of development so that we don't inhibit the development of market rate housing, because it does provide us that needed revenue. But we do have multiple tools. But we definitely hear that there is a desire to have on-site inclusionary units so that we can have more units dispersed throughout the city. So, and there's definitely opportunity within this ordinance to create that type of housing as well.
Thank you very much.
And just to kind of take a step off that, I think also that the answer is also like, yes, in a lot of ways. Like, we can't make developers step up to the table to get into negotiations with the city on how we use our funds. But as Christina just mentioned, we do have control over our lands, the public lands. We do have control over how we subsidize the development of those lands. with our own housing trust fund money, as well as the partnerships that we have with affordable housing developers. But yeah, the city doesn't build housing. I'm not sure that I would want the city to build housing necessarily, but I think when I mentioned like Article 34 of the Constitution, like right now, public housing is so hard to build in California because it requires this vote, and so you have to pay for a whole election, basically put it on the ballot to be able to build something. It makes it infeasible to do that, and so I think that's just a barrier that we face as a city in the current state of politics in California. And I hope that eventually we're not there, and this discussion could be going very differently if we weren't subject to those very old requirements. So get rid of them, in my opinion. All right. Well, with all that said, I think we've given had our questions answered, given our comments as a commission. Seems like you all have heard a lot of what was said here, some good stuff. And Denise, you unmuted yourself. Do you have something to?
I'm sorry.
Oh,
Chair?
No.
No, I'm just waiting for the next.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. You were just ahead of me. Okay, cool. That's my bad. Yeah, so let's move on to the next agenda item for the minutes, the approval of the minutes from the last, one of the last meetings. I don't even know which one is on the agenda. Is it the 24th or the?
We're approving the minutes for February 10th.
February 10th, right? Not February 24th meeting. Okay, thank you. Commissioner Bonilla.
I move the approval of the minutes.
Great.
I'll second, Chair Kenda.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve the minutes by Commissioner Bonilla and seconded by Commissioner Roche. Let's do it.
Thank you. Commissioner Ali Sullivan.
The minutes look good. Aye.
Commissioner Bonilla.
Yes.
Commissioner Goldstein.
Yes.
Commissioner Lowe.
Yes.
Commissioner Roche.
Yes.
Commissioner Stevens.
Aye.
Chair Okenda.
Yes.
Thank you. 7 ayes.
All right, excellent. So with the items on the agenda off the table, we can move on to commissioner and staff comments and announcements, and we'll start with staff, if I may.
Thank you, Chair. I have 3 quick announcements. The first one, for the benefit of the commissioners, is that you may have all received an invite for the decision maker training that is coming through Alameda County Housing Collaborative. That training will be on Friday, March 25th from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. And the topic of the training is really going to be focusing very similar to what we talked about this evening, which is we'll be focusing on strategies, policies, and processes that will help communities like Hayward more effectively develop and preserve and increase its housing that is affordable. There will also be a great opportunity for Q&A. So if you have questions or you want to hear what other questions or from other jurisdictions may have, feel free to answer and participate in that. And for those that can't participate during the 25th, the session will be recorded. So that will be available for all those who may be interested. The second item is just a friendly reminder that we are currently in the process of planning our joint Planning Commission City Council meeting to talk about the housing sites inventory as part of our housing element update. We will also be reviewing some draft policies and programs related to that, but right now that's tentatively scheduled for Tuesday, April 19th. The time for that meeting date is still to be determined, but as of now, we're thinking it's probably going to be held via Zoom platform. So it will be a virtual meeting at this stage, but we will certainly provide you more information when that becomes available. And then the last question, which kind of came up earlier, was in response to our own Planning Commission meeting and what is the opportunity for that to return to a hybrid or start a hybrid meeting format. Wanted to let everyone know that we are currently working with the City Clerk's office to develop a framework to launch that hybrid meeting. Right now, we're kind of targeting the late April, early May timeframe. And as soon as we have the details more clearly worked out, we will communicate that out to the commission. But right now, we are looking to start hybrid meetings for the Planning Commission during that timeframe. Any questions?
One question.
Sure.
About the housing sites inventory and that joint council Planning Commission meeting. Can you just say a sentence or two about what that entails?
Yeah, so as part of the housing element update, one of the things that we need to do for our planning effort is to identify all of the potential housing sites that can accommodate a realistic arena number. And so that is really the baseline. When the state is giving us arena number, they want us to be able to demonstrate that we can meet that through the sites that we currently have throughout our community. And so we'll be making a very high level presentation for feedback for the commission and the city council during that evening.
Yeah, okay, that's helpful. I've seen some pretty whack things from cities doing some stuff. So I know Hayward doesn't do that stuff.
Not at all, no.
No, we're great. All right, Commissioner Ali Sullivan.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Chair, for this. And Jeremy, thanks for all the updates there. Quick question for you, and I know that you and staff do this sort of semi-regularly. I'm wondering if maybe it's coming up soon. But over the last 2 days, I've driven the South Hayward area along Mission Boulevard, and I've seen 3 sites of projects that we as a commission approved, and absolutely no movement on the development. And so I'm curious if you can send an update, or if you're planning to send an update just on the status of development projects that have been approved by the commission and or the council, so we can get a sense of where things go. I've had a couple neighbors say, where's the Sprouts, right, for example. So any update on some of these projects would be super helpful.
Absolutely. So it is, your comment is very timely. We will be starting, we have a biannual development review update that we typically circulate to the commission and the council. Includes status updates on projects throughout the community, throughout the city, as well as programs that maybe have been launched since the last update. There's also a lot of pretty pictures. So if you're kind of wondering what's going on in a certain location around town, that certainly, picture says 1,000 words. So we'll be working on that. And as soon as that's completed, we will go ahead and circulate that out. But that does reflect all of the programs and some updates on not only planning projects, but it also will reflect information on how we're doing related to building permits and what kind of impact that's had post-pandemic or current during pandemic. As well as any sort of code enforcement initiatives that we're currently working on, which I know that there's been a lot of discussion about community preservation ordinances and such. So we'll highlight some of those ideas in our biannual update, and I would expect that would be completed sometime by middle of April or so.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you,
yeah,
Chair.
Jeremy, where's our Sprouts? Okay, I appreciate that. With all that, I don't see any other commissioners raise hands for comments. So looks like we're done here, folks. All in a good day's work. So have a good evening, stay safe. And I look forward to early May, late April, when we rejoice in our communion and have lively planning commission meetings in person. So, okay. See y'all later. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Recording stopped.